Margaret had lived alone for nearly 6 years since her husband passed away. Her days had fallen into a quiet rhythm: breakfast at 7, tea at noon, reading by the window until sunset. She lived in a cozy house by a lake in Vermont, surrounded by tall pine trees and fading memories. The house once echoed with laughter, family dinners, and late-night talks, but now it was filled with silence. She often told herself she was used to it, but deep down, she missed having someone to talk to, someone who noticed her. One chilly morning in early spring, the phone rang. It was David, her stepson, who lived in New York. He sounded cheerful as he spoke about his son, Ethan, who had just finished college. "He needs a little break from city life," David said. "Maybe a few weeks with you will do him good. He can help around the house, too." Margaret hesitated at first. She hadn't seen Ethan in years, not since he was a teenager. She remembered a shy boy who used to follow his father everywhere, barely speaking at family gatherings. Still, the idea of company warmed her heart. "Of course," she said softly. "Tell him he's welcome any time." A week later, a gray car pulled up in front of her house. Margaret peeked through the curtain and saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, with brown hair that curled slightly in the wind. He wasn't the boy she remembered. He was a man now, confident but gentle in his movements. When he smiled and waved, something unexpected stirred inside her chest, a flutter she hadn't felt in years. "Grandma Margaret," he said brightly as he carried his bag inside. His voice was warm, genuine. "You look amazing. It's been too long." She laughed, a bit shy. "Oh, stop flattering an old woman. You've grown so much, Ethan. I almost didn't recognize you." From that first moment, the air between them felt easy. Ethan settled in quickly, fixing small things around the house and helping her with groceries. They talked for hours at the dinner table about his photography work, his travels through the mountains, and how he was still trying to figure out his place in the world. Margaret found herself listening with real interest, her eyes lighting up at his stories. He had that rare energy that filled a room, that made silence feel comfortable instead of heavy. He was kind, funny, and thoughtful in ways that reminded her of her late husband, but with a spark of youth that made her heart ache with both joy and nostalgia. At night, when she went to bed, she would catch herself smiling. She told herself it was just nice to have someone around again. But deep down, she knew there was more. There was something about his laughter, his easy way of speaking, and the way he looked at her when she said something honest, like he actually cared. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, they sat together on the porch, watching the lake reflect the golden sky. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was warm, full of unspoken understanding. Ethan turned to her and said, "You know, you're easier to talk to than most people my age." The words were innocent, but they hit her in a way she didn't expect. She laughed a little nervously. "That's because I've lived long enough to listen without judgment." He smiled at that, his eyes soft and thoughtful. "Maybe that's what I've been needing." Margaret didn't know what to say. She simply looked out at the lake, feeling something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't romantic, not exactly. It was deeper, like a connection she hadn't experienced in a long time. Someone was finally seeing her again. Not as an old widow, not as a relative, but as a person with thoughts, stories, and feelings. Later that night, after he went to bed, she walked through the quiet house. Every room seemed different, now brighter, more alive. She paused by the bookshelf where her late husband's favorite novels sat untouched. For the first time in years, she picked one up. The pages smelled like dust and time, but they also smelled like life returning. She sat by the window reading, but her mind kept drifting back to the dinner table, to Ethan's voice, his laughter, and that easy smile. She scolded herself gently. "You're just lonely, that's all." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't the full truth. The next morning, she found him already outside, fixing the old fence that had been leaning for months. The sun caught his hair, and for a moment she simply watched. When he noticed her, he grinned. "Morning, Margaret. You make the best coffee in Vermont, so I made extra today." She chuckled, walking toward him. "You're spoiling me already." "Someone has to," he said lightly, but his tone carried something sincere beneath the playfulness. The day went by quickly, filled with small tasks and gentle conversations. But every so often, their eyes would meet, and the world seemed to slow for just a second. It wasn't about attraction, it was about connection. A fragile bond forming between two lonely souls who had accidentally found comfort in each other's company. That night, she couldn't sleep. The sound of rain against the roof brought back memories of when her husband was alive, how they used to sit by the fire, talking until morning. Now she was alone again, but not quite. Somewhere down the hall was someone who had brought a spark of life back into her quiet world. She didn't understand what it meant yet. She only knew that the silence didn't feel empty anymore. As she finally drifted off to sleep, she thought about how strange life could be. Sometimes warmth returned from the most unexpected places. Sometimes fate didn't care about age or titles, it just wanted two people to feel seen again. And for the first time in years, Margaret felt seen. She didn't know what the coming weeks would bring, but one thing was certain: her world had shifted just a little. And in that small shift, she felt hope that maybe life still had something new to offer. Even in the quiet corners of an old Vermont house, the next few days after Ethan's arrival passed in a blur of soft laughter, shared meals, and quiet moments that neither of them fully understood. Margaret felt lighter. For the first time in years, she woke up excited, wondering what they might do that day. What story he would tell, or what simple thing he might fix next around the house. Ethan had a way of turning even ordinary things into small adventures. One morning, he decided to clean out the old shed behind the garden. It was cluttered with tools, broken furniture, and boxes filled with forgotten memories. As they worked, Ethan found an old photo of Margaret and her husband standing beside the same shed, smiling under the summer sun. He looked at it for a moment before saying softly, "You two looked really happy." Margaret nodded, her voice quiet. He was a good man." Ethan smiled gently. "You must miss him." "Every day," she said, and then added after a pause, "But life doesn't stop just because someone you love is gone. You just learn to live differently." There was something in her tone that made Ethan look at her differently, that day not with pity, but with admiration. He respected her strength, her calmness, the way she carried years of memories with such grace. That afternoon, while they painted the porch railing, clouds began to roll in. The sky darkened quickly, and soon rain started pouring down. They ran for cover, laughing as the cold drops soaked their clothes. By the time they reached the porch, both were drenched. Ethan found a thick blanket draped over a chair and wrapped it around both of them without thinking. They stood close, catching their breath, laughing between gasps. Then, for a moment, everything went quiet. The sound of rain surrounded them, steady and soothing. Margaret felt the warmth of his arm brushing against hers. The faint scent of his soap, mixed with rain. Time seemed to freeze. It was a simple, innocent moment, but it carried something more. Something that neither of them wanted to name. Margaret gently pulled the blanket tighter and stepped back, trying to steady her thoughts. "We should get dry before we catch a cold," she said, forcing a small laugh. "Right," Ethan replied, his voice low. He looked at her for a second longer than necessary, then turned away, giving her space. That night, as she stood by the mirror, brushing her hair, Margaret caught her reflection and sighed. "What are you doing?" She whispered to herself. "He's family. He's young. Don't be foolish." But deep down, she knew it wasn't foolishness. It was something far more complicated. It was the simple ache of being seen and cared for after years of loneliness. The next morning, Ethan acted as if nothing had happened, and she was thankful for that. But something subtle had changed between them. When he talked to her, there was a softness in his eyes, a quiet understanding. And when she smiled at him, it wasn't just polite. It was real. One afternoon, they went walking along the lake. The water shimmered under the sunlight, and birds called from the trees. They talked about everything and nothing: his dreams, her youth, the way time moved too quickly. "I don't know what I'm doing with my life," Ethan admitted, skipping a small stone across the water. "I thought I'd have it figured out by now, but I feel lost." Margaret listened carefully before replying. "You're not lost. You're just searching." Everyone does at your age." He turned to her, his eyes calm but curious. "Did you ever feel like that?" She smiled wistfully. "All the time. Even now sometimes." He laughed softly. "You don't seem like someone who gets lost." "That's because I've learned how to hide it well," she said, her tone gentle but honest. As they walked back, Ethan carried a small wildflower he had picked from the trail. He handed it to her without a word. She took it, surprised, and smiled. "Thank you. It's beautiful. It's just like the garden," he said quietly, but his gaze lingered a little too long. That evening, while she cooked dinner, she caught him watching her from the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just smiled. It was the kind of smile that made her heart race for reasons she didn't want to admit. Later, as they sat eating, he spoke again, softly this time. "You know, it's strange. I feel so comfortable here. Like I've known you forever." Margaret looked down at her plate, unsure how to respond. "That's sweet of you to say," she finally whispered. "I mean it," he said firmly. "You're different. You listen. You make people feel understood." She felt warmth spread through her chest. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her like that, with kindness and genuine admiration. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard a quiet knock on her door. Her heart skipped. "Yes," she called softly. Ethan's voice came from the other side. "I just wanted to check if you were cold." The rains picked up again. "I'm fine, dear." "Thank you," she said, though her heart was still racing. He hesitated, then replied, "All right. Good night, Margaret." "Good night, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. When his footsteps faded, she sat there in the dark, staring at the door. It was such a small thing, but it felt heavy with emotion. He cared. He truly did. But it was dangerous. This warmth, this closeness that had begun to grow between them. In the morning, she tried to act normal again. They worked in the garden, baked cookies, and fixed a loose window shutter together. Yet every smile, every glance carried a quiet tension neither dared to acknowledge. Margaret knew she was standing on a fragile edge. She was too old to play with illusions, but too human to ignore the way her heart responded. She told herself it was simply the joy of companionship, the comfort of being needed. But she also knew that something deeper was stirring a connection she hadn't expected and didn't know how to stop. That night, as the sun dipped below the hills, Ethan played his guitar on the porch. His voice was soft, steady, and filled the air with calm. Margaret sat nearby, wrapped in a shawl, listening. When the song ended, he looked at her and smiled. "You've got that look again," he teased. "What look?" she asked, trying not to smile. "The one that says you're somewhere far away." She looked down, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "Maybe I am," she said quietly. In that instant, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something both beautiful and dangerous. When she went to bed later that night, she couldn't sleep. She felt alive, confused, and afraid all at once. There was a line forming between them, faint but real. She could feel it every time he smiled, every time he spoke her name. And though she told herself to be careful, part of her already knew it was too late to pretend nothing was happening. Something had changed, quietly but completely. And deep in her heart, she wasn't sure if she wanted to stop it. The third week of Ethan's visit began with a calmness that felt different. Heavier somehow. The days were bright, the air smelled of summer rain, and the lake shimmered like glass butt beneath the peaceful surface. Something quiet and powerful had begun to grow between Margaret and Ethan. Neither of them spoke about it, but they both felt it, the small glances that lingered too long, the laughter that faded into silence, and the warmth that stayed after every shared moment. That Tuesday evening, Margaret made dinner roasted vegetables and salmon, her late husband's favorite. It was a recipe she hadn't cooked in years. As she set the table, she caught herself humming, feeling that same lightness she used to feel when she expected someone she cared about to walk through the door. Ethan came in from outside, hair messy from the wind, smiling as he said, "It smells incredible in here. You're spoiling me again." She laughed softly. "You work hard around here. It's the least I can do." They ate together by candlelight, a habit that had formed without planning. He told her stories from his childhood, moments he barely remembered until now, running through fields, climbing trees, the sound of his mother's voice calling him home. She listened, smiling at the details, feeling like she was being invited into a part of his heart no one else saw. After dinner, Ethan found an old movie on the shelf, an old black and white film about two people finding love again later in life. "You used to watch this, right?" he asked. Margaret smiled. "Your grandfather loved it. We used to sit here every Friday night and watch it together." So they sat down on the couch, side by side, the flickering light of the screen painting soft shadows across the room. The film moved slowly, full of quiet emotion and the ache of time passing. When the scene came where the older couple in the movie realized they still had a chance at love, Margaret felt her throat tighten. "People don't realize how precious connection is until it's gone," she murmured, half to herself. Ethan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You still deserve it," he said quietly. She turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he hesitated, eyes soft and full of emotion. "You deserve to feel cared for, to be seen. You have this light in you, people would be lucky to even notice it." His words hit her harder than she expected. For years, people had spoken to her with politeness, kindness even, but never with this kind of truth. Ethan wasn't seeing her as an old widow. He was seeing her as a woman, alive and full of feeling. It scared her, but it also warmed her heart in a way nothing else had in years. The room went silent except for the sound of rain, beginning to tap against the windows. Margaret looked down, trying to steady herself, but then she felt his hand gently touch hers. It wasn't bold or demanding, it was gentle, almost trembling. She didn't pull away. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow. The moment was filled with everything they hadn't said out loud. The loneliness, the affection, the longing for connection neither of them had planned for. Ethan's voice was quiet. "I don't want to make things strange. I care about you. More than I probably should." Margaret looked up, eyes glistening. "You're kind, Ethan. Maybe too kind. But this, whatever this is, it's confusing." He nodded, his expression soft. "It is. But it's real." They stayed like that for a long moment, just looking at each other. The flicker of the TV light reflected in his eyes. And Margaret could see sincerity there, not recklessness, not youth chasing something forbidden, but genuine care. She felt tears form before she could stop them. "You remind me," she whispered, "that I'm still alive. I'd forgotten that feeling." Ethan reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek. His touch was tender, careful, full of respect. And for the first time in so long, she didn't feel old. She didn't feel invisible. She simply felt seen. The rain grew louder, the movie long forgotten. The air was thick with unspoken emotion. She could feel the line between them, invisible line she'd promised herself she'd never cross, but at that moment, it didn't feel wrong. It felt human. And yet, she didn't move closer. Neither did he. They simply stayed there, lost in a moment that said everything words could not. When Ethan finally stood, the spell broke. "I should get some sleep," he said softly, his voice unsteady. Margaret nodded, unable to find words. As he walked away, she felt a wave of confusion wash over her, guilt, warmth, fear, and gratitude all at once. When the door to his room closed, she sat there for a long time, staring at the soft glow of the candle on the table. She knew what had almost happened, but she also knew what had truly happened. Two lonely souls had reached for something they both needed. Understanding. Later that night, she lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the sound of the rain outside. Every drop on the window reminded her of the warmth in his voice, the gentleness in his eyes. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even sad. She was simply aware that life was still full of unexpected emotions, that the heart never really grows old. She turned on her side and stared out the window, watching the moonlight shimmer across the lake. She thought about her husband, about how he used to hold her hand in the dark, how love had once been simple and certain. But time changes things. Life changes people, and now Here she was, standing in a quiet storm of emotions she hadn't expected to feel again. She whispered into the darkness, "I don't know what this is, but thank you for reminding me that I can still feel." Sleep finally came, slow and restless. She dreamed of the rain, the flickering light of the movie, and Ethan's soft voice telling her she still deserved love. When morning came, the world outside was washed clean. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. She went to the kitchen to make coffee and found that Ethan had already brewed a pot. A small note sat beside her cup. "Thank you for the movie. It meant more than you know." Margaret smiled softly, her fingers brushing over the paper. She didn't know what the days ahead would bring, but something deep inside her had changed. The wall around her heart, the one she had built after years of silence and loss, had finally cracked open. The morning of Ethan's departure arrived quietly, the sky pale and clouded as if even the sun didn't want to say goodbye. Margaret woke early, long before her alarm, unable to rest. The house was still, the kind of silence that pressed against her chest. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the half-packed suitcase in the hallway. She had known this day was coming, but she hadn't realized how heavy it would feel. In the kitchen, she brewed coffee, the familiar smell filling the room. It reminded her of the mornings she used to share with her husband, the gentle rhythm of two people moving around each other without words. But now there were footsteps again. He walked in, hair messy, eyes soft, with that same warmth she had come to know. "Morning," he said, his voice quiet. "Morning," she replied, forcing a smile. "You have everything packed." He nodded. "Almost. Just the camera and a few things." They stood there for a few seconds, both pretending this was just another morning. But the truth hung between them, heavy and unspoken. The last few weeks had changed something neither of them could fully explain. It wasn't something they could name, but both knew they'd felt it. They ate breakfast in near silence. The clinking of spoons and the occasional scrape of toast were the only sounds. Every few moments, Margaret caught him looking at her, and she didn't know whether to smile or look away. When the dishes were done, he leaned against the counter, watching her with that thoughtful look that always made her heart stir. "I wish I could stay longer," he said. "You've done more than enough," she replied softly. "You've fixed the fence, helped with the garden. The house hasn't felt this alive in years." "It's not just the house that feels alive," he said quietly. The words caught her off guard. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She turned toward the window, hiding the emotion in her face. "You're kind, Ethan," she whispered, "but you have your own life to live. You can't stay here forever." "I know," he said, "but part of me doesn't want to go." She finally looked at him, and for the first time, she saw how much he meant it. There was sincerity in his eyes, not confusion or impulse, just the quiet truth of someone who had found a connection he hadn't expected. Margaret took a deep breath. Life does that to us sometimes. It gives us moments we don't understand. We just have to be grateful for them. He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "That night, when we watched the movie, I meant everything I said." "Yeah." She nodded, her throat tight. "I know. I don't want you to think I regret anything," he said, "because I don't. You helped me see things differently, life. Love what it means to care about someone without needing to own them." She smiled faintly, tears welling in her eyes. "You've grown wiser in a few weeks than most people do in years." He laughed softly, but there was sadness in it. "You make it sound like I'm never coming back." She hesitated. "You'll come back one day. But it'll be different. It always is." When the car pulled up outside, Ethan carried his bags to the porch. The wind had picked up, brushing through the trees, scattering a few leaves across the steps. Margaret followed him out, wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders. He turned to her, his expression torn between a smile and something deeper. "I don't know how to say goodbye," he admitted. "You just say it," she said, her voice trembling. "And then you promise to stay in touch." He looked down, then back at her. "I will. You'll hear from me, I promise." There was a long pause. Then, without thinking, he reached for her hand. His fingers were warm, his grip steady. She didn't pull away. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The world around them seemed to fade, the sound of birds, the rustle of leaves, even the distant hum of the car engine waiting down the driveway. "I'll miss you," he said finally. Margaret felt her heart ache in a way that was both painful and beautiful. "I'll miss you too, Ethan." He squeezed her hand once more, then let go. When he stepped into the car, she stayed on the porch, watching as it rolled down the gravel path. The sound of the tires faded, and soon the road was empty again. She stood there for a long time, staring at the space where the car had disappeared. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. She didn't cry, not right away. Instead, she went inside, closing the door softly behind her. The house felt different now, still but not silent. There was warmth in every corner, memories of laughter in the kitchen, quiet talks by the lake, the sound of rain on the porch roof. She ran her fingers over the old blanket they had shared that rainy afternoon. It still carried a faint scent of him, of life, of something tender and unspoken. Margaret sat by the window and stared at the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the pale light of the cloudy sky. For the first time in years, she didn't feel empty. She felt full of memories, of emotions, of life that had found its way back into her heart. She thought about the line they had both crossed, not of sin or mistake, but of awakening. It wasn't about romance or desire. It was about feeling alive again, about being reminded that the human heart never truly grows old. Later that evening, as the sun broke through the clouds, she poured herself a cup of tea and sat on the porch where they used to talk. She could almost hear his laughter echoing faintly, could almost see him leaning against the railing, smiling. She whispered into the wind, "Some people come into our lives to remind us of who we are. You were one of them, Ethan." Her eyes filled with quiet tears, not of sadness, but gratitude. She knew that their connection, however brief, had changed her. It had reminded her that it was never too late to feel something real. Days turned into weeks, and every morning she checked the mail with a quiet hope. Then, one afternoon, an envelope arrived, simple, handwritten. Inside was a small photo of the lake taken at dawn, the light golden and soft. On the back, Ethan had written, "Still feels like home." Margaret smiled, pressing the photo to her chest. She didn't need more words. She understood perfectly. Some bonds don't fade. They simply settle into the heart, calm and eternal. That evening, she went down to the lake. The water shimmered under the setting sun. She stood there for a while, watching the light ripple across the surface, and whispered to herself, "Thank you for crossing that line with kindness." As she walked back home, the world felt both the same and completely new. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt alive with memory, with love, with the gentle echo of a connection that had touched her soul. And in that peaceful silence, Margaret finally understood. Some stories don't need an ending. They simply become part of who we are. The evening rain had started quietly, painting the streets of Seattle in silver reflections. Inside a cozy little cafe tucked between tall buildings, Emma sat at her usual corner table, pretending to work on her laptop. The soft hum of jazz music filled the air, mixed with the smell of fresh coffee and pastries. It was her safe place, a corner of calm after long workdays and lonely nights. Life had become simple since her divorce 2 years ago. Too simple, maybe. She went to work, came here for coffee, went home, and repeated the same routine. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't living either. It was just existing. As she lifted her coffee cup, the doorbell chimed, breaking the soft rhythm of the cafe. She didn't look up at first. People came and went all the time. But something about the way the air shifted made her glance toward the door, and her heart stumbled. A man had just walked in, shaking off the rain from his navy coat. His presence was quiet, confident, but familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. It took her a second to realize why. It was Daniel, the same Daniel she hadn't seen in 7 years. The same man she once thought she'd build a life with, her college sweetheart, the one who taught her what love felt like and what losing it truly meant. Her fingers froze on her coffee cup. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. He looked A little older now, a bit more serious around the eyes, but still had that calm charm that used to make her heart skip. He looked around the cafe, maybe searching for a seat, maybe just passing time. Then his eyes landed on her. The shock on his face was instant and real. His lips parted slightly, like he'd seen a ghost. He stood still for a moment, umbrella still in hand, just staring. The world around them, the noise, the music, the rain seemed to fade into silence. Emma didn't move. She couldn't. She wanted to look away but couldn't tear her gaze from him. His eyes told 1,000 stories at once. Surprise, regret, nostalgia, maybe even longing. Her heart raced. She didn't know what to do. Should she wave? Smile? Pretend not to notice? But it was too late for pretending. He was already walking toward her. The sound of his footsteps grew louder as he crossed the small cafe. Each step made her more aware of the pounding in her chest. When he reached her table, he hesitated. For a second, it felt like they were back in college, about to laugh over coffee like nothing had ever changed. Emma. His voice was soft, uncertain. She blinked, forcing a small smile. Hi, Daniel. He gave a short, breathless laugh, still in disbelief. Wow, I can't believe it's you. Me neither, she said quietly. Her voice didn't sound like her own. He looked at her for a moment, as if trying to piece together the years between then and now. The silence between them wasn't empty, was full of everything they never said when they parted. She could almost feel those words sitting in the air, waiting. Finally, he spoke. You look the same. Emma smiled, trying to keep her emotions steady. You don't, she said softly. You look different. In a good way. He laughed under his breath. I'll take that as a compliment. Neither of them knew what to say next. The weight of unspoken memories hung heavy. She gestured to the chair across from her. You can sit if you want. Are you sure? He asked. Yes, she said quickly. It's fine. He sat down slowly, setting his umbrella beside him. For a moment, they just sat there. Two people who once knew everything about each other but were now trying to remember how to talk. The rain outside grew louder, tapping against the windows like a heartbeat. Emma tried to focus on something else, but her mind kept replaying old scenes, late-night study sessions, long drives, promises that once felt unbreakable. She wondered if he was remembering them too. He leaned back, glancing around. Still love coffee, huh? He said with a small smile. Some things don't change, she replied. He nodded. Yeah, some things don't. There was something about his tone, soft but weighted, that made her chest ache. She wanted to ask him everything. Where he'd been, what he was doing, if he was happy. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she just looked at him, studying the faint lines around his eyes. It's the familiar way he tapped his fingers on the table when deep in thought. So, what brings you here? She finally asked. He smiled faintly. Work, mostly. I'm in Seattle for a project. Didn't expect to run into anyone I knew. Especially me, she said quietly. He met her eyes again. Especially you. The way he said it made something stir inside her, a mix of old pain and new curiosity. Emma took a deep breath and smiled, trying to lighten the moment. Well, welcome back to Seattle. Thanks, he said softly, eyes still locked on hers. It's strange. This city feels the same, but different somehow. Maybe we're the ones who changed, she said. He thought about that for a moment, then nodded. Maybe you're right. For a while, neither of them spoke. The barista called out an order. A couple laughed near the counter. Life went on around them, but for Emma and Daniel, time had folded. It felt like the universe had paused just long enough for them to meet again. He glanced down at his watch. I should probably let you get back to work, he said, though his tone made it clear he didn't really want to leave. She hesitated, then smiled politely. Yeah, I should finish up. He stood, picking up his umbrella. And for a second she thought that was it, that he'd walk out and disappear again, leaving her to wonder what might have been. But just before he turned, he looked at her once more, his eyes soft. "It's really good to see you, Emma," he said quietly. Her heart squeezed. "You too, Daniel." Then he nodded and walked away. The door chimed as he stepped into the rain. She watched him through the window until he disappeared down the street, swallowed by the glow of the city lights. Emma sat back, her heart full of questions. She didn't know if fate had just played a cruel trick or given her a second chance. All she knew was that when he entered that cafe, something deep inside her had woken up, a feeling she thought she had buried long ago. The rain outside softened, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to hope. And as she stared at the empty chair across from her, one thought echoed quietly in her mind. Why now? Daniel's eyes stayed on Emma longer than she expected. It wasn't a passing glance. It was deep, searching like he was trying to believe she was really sitting there. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them blurred. The quiet chatter, the music, even the rain outside faded. It felt like a scene from another lifetime suddenly returning. He finally walked closer. His steps slow, careful, almost hesitant. "Emma," he said again, his voice a little uncertain but full of emotion. She looked up, heart beating fast. "Hi, Daniel," she replied softly. He sat down across from her as if he couldn't help it. The air between them carried something familiar and heavy. He studied her face quietly for a few seconds, his expression warm but curious. "You haven't changed much," he said. Emma smiled lightly. "You have," she said honestly. "You look older, wiser, maybe, but still the same somehow." He chuckled, brushing a bit of rain from his hair. "I'll take that as a compliment." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was loaded. There were too many questions, too many memories trying to find space. She glanced out the window, watching cars pass through puddles, their headlights cutting through the misty air. He followed her gaze, then turned back to her. "Do you still come here often?" he asked. "Almost every day after work," she said. "It's my little corner of peace." He smiled gently. "Still a creature of habit, I see." She raised an eyebrow playfully. "And you? What brings you here after all this time?" He leaned back slightly. "Work. I'm doing a photo series around Seattle for a travel magazine. Thought I'd stop for a coffee." Emma nodded, hiding the small tremor in her voice. "So, you're still taking pictures?" "Always," he said softly. "It's the one thing that never left me." She smiled faintly, remembering how he used to carry his old camera everywhere. Even when they were young and broke, he found beauty in everything: sunsets, strangers, and sometimes her. For a while, he just talked about their jobs, the city, how fast time seemed to pass. It was simple conversation, but every word felt loaded with years of emotion. It was strange how natural it felt, as if the gap between them had only been a few days. Not 7 long years. At one point, Daniel looked at her and smiled softly. "You still stir your coffee 3 times before drinking it?" he said. She blinked in surprise, laughing quietly. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he replied without hesitation. Something in his tone made her heart flutter. She didn't know how to respond, so she looked down at her cup instead. "I guess some habits never change." He nodded. "Some feelings don't either." His words hung in the air like a quiet confession. She glanced at him, meeting his eyes, and saw something theirs, something raw. It was the same look he used to give her when he was about to say something important. But before she could ask what he meant, a barista passed by with fresh pastries, breaking the tension. Daniel leaned back, looking away for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "So, you live nearby?" he asked. "Yeah, a few blocks from here," she replied. "Small apartment, nothing fancy. It's quiet." He smiled. "You always liked quiet places." She nodded. "And you always liked loud ones." They both laughed softly. The laughter felt good, real, like it used to. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt her guard lowering. Daniel looked at her again, his gaze steady. "It's strange," he said. "Seeing you here like this, it feels like time stopped for a second." She tilted her head, curious. Stopped in a good way or a bad way? He hesitated, then smiled. In a way that makes me wonder what I've been doing all this time. Her chest tightened at his words. She didn't want to overthink it, but the meaning was clear. There was still something between them, something that hadn't died, even after all these years. Emma tried to keep the conversation light, but her heart was racing. "Do you ever think about the old days?" she asked carefully. He gave a small, almost wistful smile. "More often than I admit, especially about the people I let go too easily." Her eyes softened. "You didn't let go easily. We both did what we thought was right. Maybe," he said quietly, looking down at his hands. "But sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel right at all." His words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to ask if he still thought about them, about what they had lost. But before she could, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it briefly, then turned it face down on the table. "Work," he muttered. "It never stops." She smiled faintly. "You used to say the same thing back then." He laughed. "Guess that's one more thing that hasn't changed." For a moment, they both smiled. But beneath the smiles was something deeper, quiet ache neither dared to name. Outside, the rain grew heavier, hitting the windows in soft, steady rhythm. The light from the cafe lamps reflected in the puddles, casting a golden glow. Daniel's face looked thoughtful, almost sad. He took a slow sip of his coffee, then leaned forward slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," she said. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't ended things?" The question took her by surprise. She didn't know how to answer. Memories rushed back, the arguments, the distance, the way they both walked away without really wanting to. She swallowed hard. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly, "but life doesn't always give us the chance to know." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe it's better that way." But the look in his eyes said otherwise. Emma smiled faintly, trying to keep the moment gentle. "Well, at least we got a good story out of it." He laughed softly. "I don't know. Maybe the story isn't finished yet." That line lingered in her mind long after he said it. She didn't respond, just looked at him, her heart quietly betraying her calm expression. The clock on the cafe wall ticked softly, marking the time neither of them noticed passing. For that brief hour, it felt like they'd stepped out of their own lives and into something they used to know, something that still felt alive between them. When Daniel finally looked at his watch, surprise flickered across his face. "I should probably go," he said reluctantly. Emma nodded. "Yeah, it's getting late," hesitated before standing. "It was really good seeing you again." "You too," she said, her voice almost a whisper. He smiled one last time before heading toward the door. She watched him go, her chest heavy but warm. When he reached the exit, he turned back just for a moment and their eyes met again. He gave her that familiar look, the one that said there's still something here. And then he was gone. Emma sat there quietly, staring at the rain-soaked window, her heart caught somewhere between past and present. It felt like fate had just reopened a door she thought was locked forever. And deep down she knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something unexpected. The next evening came faster than Emma expected. She tried to tell herself it was just another ordinary day, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. The memory of Daniel's eyes, his voice, the quiet way he said her name, it all stayed with her. She told herself not to overthink, but she couldn't stop wondering what that meeting really meant. When she walked into the cafe again, it felt different. The same soft music played, the same warm lights glowed, but now there was anticipation in the air. She found herself glancing at the door, hoping, maybe even expecting, to see him again. She told herself he wouldn't come. He probably had a busy schedule, another city to fly to, another project to chase. But when the bell above the door chimed, her heart skipped. Daniel walked in, just like before. But this time there was no surprise, only a smile that said he'd been hoping to see her too. "You came," he said, his voice gentle. "You too," she replied, trying to hide the warmth in her cheeks. He took the seat across from her, the same one as last night. The tension from before had softened. Now there was a quiet comfort between them. like they had slipped into something familiar again. "I wasn't sure you'd be here," he said, resting his hands on the table. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, "but something told me I should be." He smiled. "I'm glad you listened." For a while, they talked easily. He told her about the places he'd been: New York, Paris, Lisbon, how his camera had seen more of the world than he had time to enjoy. She listened, genuinely interested, laughing at his small stories and admiring his passion. When he spoke about his work, his eyes lit up the way they used to when he talked about her. Emma told him about her job at the publishing house, how she loved discovering writers with raw talent. "It's strange," she said, "helping others tell their stories while mine feels unfinished." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe that's because some stories take time to find their ending." She met his gaze, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. There was truth in his words, a quiet understanding that didn't need explanation. Their conversation drifted into lighter things, old college memories, mutual friends, the things they used to dream about. When she mentioned how she used to imagine traveling with him, he smiled softly. "I remember," he said, "you wanted to see the northern lights. You promised to photograph them for me," she said. He nodded. "I did, but I never did see them." "Maybe one day," she said. He smiled again, a little wistful. "Maybe." The cafe had grown busier, but Emma didn't notice. The rest of the world seemed to fade around them. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, understood. Then Daniel's tone changed, softer now. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Did you ever think we'd meet again like this?" She thought for a moment. "No. I used to think our story ended the day we walked away. But life's strange. Sometimes it brings things back when we least expect it." He nodded. "Maybe it's trying to tell us something." She smiled faintly. "Or remind us of something." He looked at her carefully. "I never forgot you, Emma." The words hit her harder than she expected. "You don't mean that?" she said, trying to keep her composure. "I do," he said quietly. "I thought I moved on, but then I saw you yesterday and it all came rushing back. It's like time folded in on itself." Her heart raced. She wanted to say something, but emotion caught in her throat. She looked down at her cup, tracing the rim with her finger. "We had our reasons, Daniel. We were young. Life took us in different directions." "I know," he said, "but that doesn't mean I stopped caring." Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "It's been 7 years," she whispered. "People change." He gave a small smile. "Then maybe we've just changed enough to understand what we lost." That sentence stayed in her mind long after he said it. The air between them grew still, filled with emotion neither of them could hide anymore. Finally, she broke the silence. "So what happens now? You're here for a few days and then you'll leave again. I'll go back to my normal life. Maybe we're just supposed to have this one moment." He shook his head slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe this is the start of something we never finished." His words made her heart ache in the best way. She didn't know what to believe, but she couldn't deny what she felt. They kept talking until the lights dimmed slightly, signaling the cafe was close to closing. Emma laughed softly. "We're the last ones here." Daniel grinned. "Some things never change." They stood up together, and for a second, neither of them moved. The distance between them felt small but heavy with meaning. She could feel his presence so close, warm, and familiar. "I'll walk you to your car," he offered. She nodded. The rain had stopped, but the air was cool and fresh. They walked in silence, side by side, their footsteps echoing softly on the wet pavement. When they reached her car, they both stopped, unsure how to end the night. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming." He smiled. "Thank you for letting me." There was a pause. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and she could see the emotions he didn't speak. "Emma," said slowly, "I don't know what's supposed to happen next, but I do know that seeing you again, it reminded me of who I was before I lost you." Her breath caught. "Daniel." He smiled faintly, stepping back just enough to keep it easy, respectful. "Good night, good night," she whispered. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the quiet street. She stood there, watching until he was gone, her heart both heavy and light. When she got home, she couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in her mind. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how he said he never forgot her. A part of her wanted to believe it. Another part was scared too. The next evening, the sky over Seattle was soft and gray, brushed with fading light. Emma walked toward the cafe with her heart racing. She didn't know why she was nervous. It was just coffee, just a conversation. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The last 2 nights had stirred something she thought was gone forever. She told herself she was only going to say goodbye, properly, to bring closure. But her heart already knew she wanted to see him again. When she entered the cafe, Daniel was already there, sitting at their usual table. He looked up as she walked in, his face lighting up in a way that made her chest tighten. "You came," he said with a quiet smile. "I said I would," she replied, trying to sound calm even though her pulse was racing. He stood up slightly, as if still remembering his old manners, then sat down when she did. The light above them glowed warmly, wrapping the table in a golden hue. Everything around them, the chatter, the sound of steaming milk, the faint jazz faded into the background. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me again," he said. Emma smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure either. But I guess I wanted to know what you'd say." He nodded slowly. "I thought a lot about us after last night," he began. "About how things ended and what might have been different if we'd fought harder." She looked down at her cup, swirling her spoon quietly. "We were both stubborn. I thought I was doing the right thing by letting go." "So did I," he said softly. "But now I'm not sure if walking away was strength or fear." His words struck something deep. She remembered how painful that goodbye had been, the silence, the pride, the heartbreak they never really faced. And now, here they were, older, calmer, sitting in the same city again, wondering if they had learned enough to understand what they'd lost. "I don't know what's supposed to happen now," she said quietly. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Maybe we don't need to know. Maybe we just see where it goes." She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no rush, no demand, just honesty. And it scared her because part of her wanted to believe him. They talked for a long time that evening. Not about the past, but about now. About who they'd become. Daniel spoke about how traveling had shown him the beauty of connection, but also the loneliness of always leaving. "Every time I looked through the lens, I saw faces, stories, emotions, but I never stayed long enough to be part of any of them," he said. Emma smiled gently. "Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe you needed to stop running." He looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. "And maybe you were the one thing I should have never run from." Her breath caught. She didn't answer right away. Her mind tried to stay logical, but her heart had already taken over. There was warmth in his words, a truth she couldn't ignore. The cafe began to empty, one table at a time. The rain started again outside, soft and rhythmic, painting the windows with silver trails. Emma and Daniel stayed where they were, lost in a quiet world of their own. When the barista announced closing time, they finally stood. Neither wanted to leave, but neither knew how to stay. Daniel hesitated by the door, his hand resting on the frame. "Can I see you again before I go?" She froze, surprised. "When do you leave?" "In 2 days," he said. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Tomorrow, same time." His smile widened, relieved. "It's a date," he said softly. Her heart skipped a beat. "Not a date," she replied quickly, trying to hide her smile. "Sure," he said teasingly, eyes warm. "Not a date." He opened the door, but before leaving, he turned back to her one last time. The cafe lights reflected in his eyes, soft and full of feeling. "You still make the world stop for a second," he said gently. Then he stepped into the rain and was gone. Emma stood there speechless, her heart trembling in the quiet. She walked home under her umbrella, but her mind was far away. Every step echoed with memories, his voice, his look, the way he said her name. At home, she sat by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. Her heart felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. It wasn't just nostalgic, was real. Something inside her whispered that maybe fate had brought him back for a reason. She tried to sleep, but the night felt endless. She thought about what he said, that maybe they didn't need to know what would happen next. Maybe that was the point. Maybe this time she didn't have to protect herself from what she felt. The next morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Emma woke early, feeling strangely calm. She made her coffee, looked out the window, and smiled at the thought of seeing him again. But as the day went on, time seemed to slow. She checked her phone more than once, half expecting a message from him, but there was nothing. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he'd show up later. Still, a small flicker of worry grew in her chest. When she reached the cafe that evening, her heart raced again. The same seat, the same coffee, the same song playing. But this time, the door didn't open. Minutes passed, then an hour. The rain started again. She told herself he was delayed traffic work, anything. Finally, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "I'm sorry. Got called for an early flight. Didn't plan it. Didn't get to say goodbye properly. But last night meant more than you know." She read it twice, her chest tightening. It wasn't what she wanted, but somehow it was enough. She smiled sadly, typing back, "Take care, Daniel. Maybe someday we'll finish our story." He replied a minute later. "Maybe we already did. Maybe it just ended right." She looked out the cafe window, the rain falling steady and soft, and realized he was right. Maybe not all stories end with promises or forever. Some just end with peace, understanding, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone once saw you completely. As she walked home, she felt something shift inside her. The ache that had lingered for years was gone, replaced by warmth. Seeing him again hadn't broken her, had healed her in ways she didn't expect. When she reached her apartment, she set down her umbrella and looked at the framed photograph on her shelf, a picture from college, taken by Daniel. She smiled. For the first time in years, the memory didn't hurt. Maybe love wasn't always about staying. Sometimes it was about finding closure, forgiving the past, and knowing that even if life took people different ways, what they shared was still real. And as the rain finally stopped, Emma whispered to herself, "Thank you for finding me again, Daniel. 'Cause sometimes just being remembered is enough."